Have you ever been in a situation where you had to think about what you need to say next? You know you need to have a hard conversation, but you're not sure how to approach it. Now, we've all been there. We've been in situations where we know we need to tell that person or that boss or that individual in our family that we have to give them some information and we have to tell it the way that it needs to be told or they won't understand it. But we just have this immense feeling of, I don't want to do it, this dread of speaking up. When you're in a situation where you have to speak up, even the term speak up is the sense that we feel that we're down, that we're not where we need to be, that it's going to take an effort, right, to actually say something to someone. And so because we don't want to feel that, we have these issues. And I want to give you 3 things that you need to keep in mind that will help you to learn how to speak up. Whether you're speaking in front of a crowd, whether you're speaking to a friend, where there's time to actually say something because you need to have a hard conversation with your boss, whatever that thing is, these are things you want to keep in mind. So first and foremost, I want to talk to you about something that is very dangerous. Let's go to my whiteboard for a minute. And this first thing that I want to kind of talk to you about is overthinking. Now, when you see this overthinking, I want you to keep in mind, there's nothing wrong with thinking, right? We want to do some thinking. The challenge is when we begin to add this element of over. And what we mean is that I'm doing something, right? Something not necessary, right? Or too much. So sometimes what stops us from speaking up is the fact that we're thinking too much, okay? We're thinking more than is needed. And so we're over what was required, right? So this is very, very important. When you're over what is required, you're not going to be in a situation in which you're going to feel good about doing that thing or having that communication, right? That's why, even when you think about over, whenever you're talking or you're communicating, that's why we even use clocks and time so we can know if we're over or if we're not. We have to know that, right? So if you don't have an element, if you don't have a standard, it's hard to know if you're over time or if you're under time. But it's the same thing with thinking. How long do you give to something? How much time do you use, about thinking about what's going to happen or what's going to come up, or even thinking about what you're going to say? Now, here's the thing. We want to say the right thing when it's time to speak up, when it's time to say that thing that we need to say. We want to say the right thing. But when we overthink, we end up actually saying more than what was required, and it becomes ineffective. Did you know, even in sales, when you have to sell and you're actually talking to someone and you learn the difference between convincing something to buy something for your purposes, which is not truly selling, and that's why people say they don't like selling, but they don't like being convinced to get something that they know doesn't benefit them. But sales is persuading someone to actually get something that they do want. And so when you do that, did you know there's a point at which you can actually tell someone about the value that's available for them, but you can talk so much that you actually talk them out of the purchase or the sale? Well, you can do that when you actually talk someone out of believing a thought or an idea. You can talk someone out of actually considering taking an action because you overdid it. So this is what we don't want to do. Overthinking is when we begin to stay in our minds so much and for so long that we end up in a situation where we're not effective. So overthinking, this is a big one, right? So this is a key that we don't want to do, right? This is the first thing we want to keep in mind. Now, let's go to another key thing. Now, I want you to keep in mind, when let me just put it this way. We want to move from overthinking to simplicity, right? So we're thinking about at what point, right? At what point have I arrived at a sense of clarity about what is required, and to realize how that clarity can lead to a point of comfort. So I've got to get to the point where my clarity has brought comfort. And the comfort is I see and understand enough to be able to communicate what I need to communicate. So I don't have to continue thinking deeper and turning the thinking into to finding another way to do it, another way to say it, so much so that I don't realize I already have clarity and I already am at a place of comfort, right? And so the key is we have to allow, right? We must allow this to take place. So the person who's overthinking won't allow this comfort to come. Instead, right? Instead, they have conflict. And that conflict makes them question if they really are even clear. And this vicious cycle just continues, right? Over and over again. So this is what we don't want. All right, now let's go to number 2. Now, number 2 I want to talk to you about is insecurity. Now, insecurity is very, very, critical. And so you can see inside of this word is security. And when we think about security, right, this has a lot to do with feeling safe and protected, right? So, and when you look at within, it would seem that it would mean that I'm in safety and protection, right? It almost seems like this word, right, should be called out security, right? Like I feel out of security, right? So when you look at the word, sometimes it's hard to actually follow. But remember, we're really looking at this, the baseline of insecurity is coming from the word insecure, right? And insecure is actually the opposite, right? Where I don't feel safe and protected. Now, I want you to understand that when it is time to speak up and you don't feel safe to say what you want to say, the issue that we deal with that is very important, right, is an extreme need for validation. And this is the problem when you have an extreme need for someone to validate that whatever you're going to say is the right thing to say. You get to the point where you're not able to live for yourself. You're not able to speak for yourself because at some point you have to become your own validation. If you don't have the ability to validate how you feel, right? And that be good enough to validate what you want to communicate. Doesn't mean it has to be perfect. Doesn't mean it has to even be right, but it's how you feel. And so it allows you to speak up because you're able to realize that the constant seeking of this validation from an external resource or person is what keeps me in the box of insecurity. So I have to learn how to create something on the inside. Now, we have insecure, but really there's not the right thing inside. It's in insecure, there's the feeling of feeling unsafe and unprotected on the inside, right? So what we have to do, we have to move from insecurity to empowerment. And notice inside of empowerment is this word power, right? And we want to, again, be able to generate power from within. And this is really what empowerment, or we can say self-empowerment, to be more specific. We want to be able to generate this power from within that causes us to be, to understand that we have the power within. We have our own self-starter, self-generator that we can turn on, and we don't have anyone else to rely on. We have no other validation from anyone else. But there's a power we can turn on from the inside because we think about who we really are and what we've come through and the fact that I have every right and ability to be able to speak up about how I feel. So you have to embrace that. You have to embrace that internal power that is able to provide all the validation you could ever need, because you're able to think from a place of having within what is required to be qualified to say what you want to say. And so you have to move from this insecurity, right, to this empowerment that we see here on the right. Now, this is the second thing, right, that I want to give you today. But now let's move to the third thing, right? And this third thing is a very powerful word, anxiety, right? Anxiety. Now, I want you to understand anxiety, just to be really clear, and I'll put this in red. This is, right, a negative belief about a future outcome, right? So this is a big one. So when we're thinking about speaking up, we run these calculations in our mind very quickly, and we think about how it could go, how it could be received, what people are going to feel, what people are going to think. And if you have a negative belief in the outcome that will come as the result of you speaking up, and we have to really define negative, right? Because for some people, they want to be liked by everyone. So negative to them is that someone's not going to like what I say. Well, sometimes that's a requirement to tell the truth. Sometimes that's a requirement to be real and to be a true friend, to show real love. So we have to understand, if you define negative the wrong way, then you will have an anxiety about something that you should not. So we want to understand that this is a negative, feeling that we get because of this negative belief. So when we have this negative belief about a future outcome, it creates, right, a feeling of anxiety, right? So what do we want to do, right? What do we want to do? So what we have to do, if we're going to think about the future outcome, we want to move from anxiety to anticipation. Now, anticipation, this is a positive feeling about a future outcome. So it's exactly the opposite. Now, consider, for me to move to anticipation instead of anxiety, I have to actually begin to change perspective. So here's the key. When we want to anticipate a positive future outcome, we have to make sure that we're clear on this future outcome being defined the right way. So some people, they want the future outcome to always be that people like them, that people are happy with them, that, whatever it is that you're doing that you have to speak up for. A lot of times the reason we don't want to speak up, we're worried about being embarrassed. We're worried about what people think. We're worried about what could go wrong. We're worried about it not coming out right. But when you redefine what future outcome means, if you define the future outcome by the feeling that you will have by, just knowing you spoke up for yourself, by being able to communicate to someone who needed to hear something. Now, what they do with it after you tell them is up to them. But if you look at the future outcome, that I'm going to anticipate feeling so great that I gave them the information they needed to hear. Parents have to do this when they tell their child something they don't want to hear. People in relationships, sometimes you have to talk about things you don't want to talk about. But if you don't, you'll continue to live in a misery because the other person is not clear that they're hurting you. So the key is we have to begin to change the perspective of what really is negative and positive. What is a good future outcome? Because if we have the wrong definition of that future outcome, we'll always make the wrong choice and decision when it comes to allowing anxiety to paralyze us from speaking up and being able to say the things that we want to say at the right time. And so this is number 3. And so again, we talked about 3 critical things here. We talked about overthinking. We talked about insecurity, and we talked about making sure we get rid of anxiety. We do that by going from overthinking to simplicity. We go from insecurity to empowerment. We go from anxiety to anticipation. And I would invite you as the CEO of your life to never stop speaking up when it really matters and you know that it's going to be something that can take your life forward. Have the courage to be the CEO of you by charging, expanding, and overcoming. Until next time, I'm Michael E. Parker, and speak up. It's part of your job to be a CEO of you.